It was a crisp October morning when the truth finally unraveled. The peaceful streets of Maplewood, a quiet suburban neighborhood, were disturbed by something rare, flashing red and blue lights bouncing off freshly painted houses. Outside a charming two-story home, neighbors gathered, whispering in hushed tones as officers moved with quiet urgency. Inside, sitting stiffly on the living room couch, Jessica Harper stared at the papers in her trembling hands. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat erratic. Every letter, every name, every date on the documents screamed the same impossible truth. Her husband, the man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with, was a lie. And worse? The FBI had been hunting him for years. Before we proceed, I would like to know where you are watching from. Kindly let me know in the comments section. Are you done? Let's proceed with the story. Jessica had always been cautious when it came to love. After a series of failed relationships, she had thrown herself into her career as an interior designer, convinced that she was better off alone. Then, she met Daniel Harper. He was everything she had ever wanted: charming, confident, and effortlessly charismatic. With a strong jawline and warm, piercing eyes, he exuded a quiet authority that made people listen when he spoke. From their first date, he made her feel like the only woman in the world. Candlelit dinners, surprise weekend getaways, heartfelt compliments that felt tailor-made just for her. Daniel was perfect. Too perfect. But love had a way of silencing doubts, and before she knew it, she had fallen hard. Within a year, they were married. And for a while, life was exactly what she had dreamed. Or so she thought. At first, the warning signs were subtle. Daniel was private. He never spoke much about his childhood. When Jessica asked about his family, he would brush it off with vague answers: "They're not in the picture." She didn't push. Everyone had their secrets. But then there were the business trips. They always came suddenly, last-minute meetings in different states, urgent client demands. Jessica had never seen a single email or phone call confirming these trips, but Daniel always packed with such certainty. Then there was the money. Daniel always paid in cash. Their accounts, supposedly joint, were primarily controlled by him. Whenever Jessica inquired, he would chuckle, dismissing it with, "You don't need to stress about finances, babe. I've got it all covered." But the biggest red flag? He never let her touch his briefcase. One evening, when Daniel was away on another business trip, Jessica's curiosity got the best of her. His office door was unlocked. His briefcase, for the first time, was left unattended. Her hands trembled as she unlatched it, telling herself it was nothing, just a harmless look. But what she found inside made her stomach drop. 2 passports. Different names. Different birthplaces. Different identities. But the same face. Her husband's face. Panic gripped her chest. She swallowed hard, flipping through more documents tucked neatly inside. Bank statements from accounts she had never heard of. Transactions worth thousands of dollars moving across different states. Then, at the very bottom of the briefcase, an envelope. Jessica hesitated before pulling it out, her fingers cold against the paper. Inside was a single photograph. A grainy surveillance image of Daniel walking through an airport. Across the front, stamped in bold, unforgiving letters: FBI case file, wanted for questioning. Jessica's world tilted. Her pulse roared in her ears as she shoved everything back into place. She had to think. She had to act normal. But then, the front door clicked open. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Daniel was home. Jessica barely had time to compose herself before he stepped into the office, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. He never let her in his office. And now, she was standing in the middle of it. Daniel, calm, but firm. "What are you doing here?" Jessica's throat went dry. She forced a smile, praying he couldn't hear the terror in her heartbeat. "Jessica, casual, but shaky. Just looking for a pen." A tense silence. Then, Daniel smiled. But something in his eyes had changed. The warmth that had once made her feel safe was gone. "Daniel," softly. "Next time, just ask." He stepped forward, brushing a kiss against her forehead, his fingers lingering just a second too long on her wrist. A silent warning. Jessica didn't breathe until he turned away, exiting the room as if nothing had happened. But something had. She had seen too much. And now? She was in danger. That night, Jessica lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Her husband was not who he claimed to be. The FBI was after him. But why? She had two choices. Stay and pretend nothing has changed. Or run, before it was too late. But before she could decide, a phone vibrated on Daniel's nightstand. He was asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. Jessica turned her head slightly, glancing at the screen. One unread message flashed in the dim light. From an unknown number. She knows. Take care of it. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't just in danger. She was his next target. The night air was cold against Jessica's skin as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. The streetlights cast eerie shadows across the empty road ahead, but her mind was racing too fast to notice. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get away. Behind her, the dark silhouette of her home, the home she had shared with Daniel, grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The place that had once felt safe was now a prison of lies. Her husband wasn't who he said he was. And worse, he knew that she knew. Jessica sat in her dimly lit home office, her hands shaking as she held the grainy FBI case file photo. The image of Daniel, her Daniel, walking through an airport, a stamp across the top reading, "Wanted for questioning." Her breath hitched. Her mind screamed for answers. How had she been so blind? She forced herself to think logically. She needed proof, concrete proof, before she confronted him. Maybe she was misunderstanding something. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Or maybe she was living with a monster. Determined, she dug deeper. At the bottom of the drawer, she found more documents. Different IDs. Multiple bank accounts. Offshore transactions with untraceable amounts. And then, tucked inside a plain white envelope, she found a photograph. It was an old, faded image of a woman she had never seen before. But something about it made Jessica's stomach churn. On the back, scrawled in small, sharp handwriting, was a single date. April 12, 2017. Jessica frowned. That was long before she had met Daniel. Why would he keep this? And why did it feel like a piece of a much bigger, much darker puzzle? Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, her instincts screaming at her to dig deeper. But before she could open the search bar, a floorboard creaked behind her. She froze. Jessica turned slowly, her heart pounding. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. His sharp blue eyes flickered to the open drawer, then back to her hands. "You shouldn't be in here, Jess." His voice was low, measured. Jessica swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "I was just... What are you looking for?" His tone was different now, colder. She hesitated. Lying felt pointless. He already knew. Instead, she raised the FBI case file in her hand. "Who are you, Daniel?" For a split second, something flashed across his face, an emotion she couldn't place. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You don't want to do this," he said. Jessica took a step back, her pulse thudding in her ears. "You lied to me. Our whole life, our marriage, it's all been a lie, hasn't it?" Daniel exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me." Her voice cracked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I married a stranger." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Daniel took a slow step forward. "Jessica," he said softly, "whatever you think you know, it's only part of the story. If you love me, you'll trust me." The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. Trust him? Could she? Then she remembered the IDs. The money. The woman in the photograph. No. Whatever Daniel was hiding, it was dangerous. And she wasn't going to wait around to find out just how dangerous. She needed to leave. Now. Jessica forced herself to nod, pretending to believe him. "Okay," she whispered. "I trust you." Daniel's lips curled into something that almost looked like relief. "Good. Why don't you go lie down? I'll clean this up." She didn't argue. She turned, walking slowly toward the hallway. She could feel his eyes on her back. Every nerve in her body was on high alert. The moment she reached the bedroom, she grabbed the small emergency bag she had packed weeks ago, the one she had prepared just in case. She stuffed the FBI file inside, along with a few essentials, and quietly slipped out the back door. Her heart pounded as she ran through the yard, her breath visible in the cold night air. She climbed into her car and started the engine, praying he wouldn't hear. As she pulled out onto the street, she glanced back at the house. The lights were still on. The silhouette of Daniel stood in the window, unmoving, watching. She didn't wait to see what he would do next. She floored the gas and disappeared into the night. Jessica didn't stop driving until she was miles away. She pulled into an empty gas station parking lot, gripping the steering wheel as she tried to steady her breathing. She had to think. She needed help. But who could she trust? The police? No. If Daniel had managed to fool her for this long, there was no telling how deep his connections ran. The FBI? Her eyes dropped to the case file in her lap. It was her best shot. Hands trembling, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the document. A voice answered on the third ring. FBI field office. How can I assist you? Jessica swallowed. I think I have information about a wanted person. There was a pause. Then, can I have your name? She hesitated. Not yet. But I have proof. I need to know if it's safe to come in. Another pause. Then the voice softened. Ma'am, where are you? Jessica glanced out the windshield, scanning the dark, empty parking lot. I don't know. A gas station off Highway 9. We can send an agent to you. No, she cut in quickly. I'll come to you. She wasn't going to risk waiting. Not when she had no idea how much Daniel already knew. She jotted down the address they gave her and hung up. Taking a deep breath, she restarted the car. She had barely pulled back onto the road when she saw it. A pair of headlights in her rearview mirror. And they weren't just following her. They were gaining. Jessica's hands tightened on the wheel. Maybe it was just another driver. Maybe she was just being paranoid. But then the car behind her sped up, closing the distance between them. Her pulse skyrocketed. Was it Daniel? Had he figured out where she was going? She couldn't take the risk. Jessica slammed her foot on the gas, her car lurching forward. The headlights behind her swerved, keeping pace. Her heart pounded in her chest. She thought she had escaped. She was wrong. And now, someone was coming for her. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the phone, her pulse hammering in her ears. She had just hung up with the FBI agent, her mind reeling from everything she had learned. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with, Daniel Reynolds, was not just living under a false identity. He was a fugitive. A dangerous one. And worse, he knew she was onto him. The night air pressed against the windows as she sat alone in the dimly lit living room, every creak of the house setting her nerves on edge. She had locked all the doors, checked the windows twice, and kept a kitchen knife within arm's reach. But deep down, she knew none of it would matter. If Daniel wanted to get to her, he would. Her mind raced, replaying their last conversation. The look in his eyes when he had asked about the envelope. The lingering touch on her wrist. The unspoken warning. She had to leave. Now. Emily forced herself to think rationally. She couldn't just run blindly. Daniel was smart, calculated. He would anticipate her moves. If she went to a hotel, he would find her. If she went to her parents' house, she'd put them in danger. No, she needed a plan. Her fingers darted over her phone, quickly searching for last-minute bus tickets. A one-way trip to Chicago, 8 hours away. It wasn't far enough, but it was a start. She'd buy another ticket from there. Keep moving. She grabbed a duffel bag and started packing. Just the essentials, her laptop, a few changes of clothes, the envelope of evidence, and the emergency cash she kept stashed in the back of her closet. Then, she heard it. A car pulling into the driveway. Her stomach dropped. The headlights washed over the living room, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. Emily barely had time to react before she heard the sound of the front door unlocking. He still has a key. Her body tensed as the door creaked open. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Emily? Daniel's voice echoed through the quiet house. Are you awake? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. If she panicked now, he would see right through her. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, gripping the strap of her duffel bag tightly. You're home early. Daniel stepped into the dim light, his gaze sweeping over her, then landing on the half-packed bag at her feet. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, he smiled. Going somewhere? Her heart pounded. She needed an excuse. Something believable. I was thinking about visiting my sister for a few days, she said, forcing a casual tone. Just needed a break. Daniel nodded slowly, stepping closer. Too close. You know, Emily, his voice was soft, almost gentle. Lately, you've been acting strange. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? His eyes locked onto hers, searching. You've been distracted. Distant. His gaze flickered toward the bag again. And now, I find you trying to leave in the middle of the night. Emily tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. Daniel's smile faded. Tell me the truth, Emily. His voice was lower now. What's going on? Every instinct screamed at her to run. To get out. But she knew that one wrong move could set him off. I need some space, she said carefully. That's all. Daniel studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her horror, he reached into his jacket pocket. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was it a gun? A knife? Instead, he pulled out something small. A passport. And it wasn't his. It was hers. Funny thing, he said, flipping through the pages. I was cleaning up earlier and found this. But it wasn't where you usually keep it. Emily's mouth went dry. Daniel took another step closer, lowering his voice. You're not telling me everything, are you? She forced herself to stay still, to meet his gaze without revealing her fear. I don't know what you're talking about. Silence stretched between them. Then, Daniel smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. You're lying. Emily knew she had seconds to act. If she hesitated, she might not get another chance. Her eyes flickered to the hallway behind him. The front door was too far. The only option was the back. In a split second, she lunged, grabbing the lamp from the nightstand and swinging it with all her strength. The crash echoed through the room as the lamp shattered against his shoulder. Daniel cursed, staggering back just enough for Emily to bolt past him. Her feet pounded against the hardwood floor as she sprinted down the hall. She could hear him recovering, hear his footsteps closing in behind her. She reached the kitchen, grabbing the knife she had left on the counter. She spun around just as Daniel stormed in after her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's expression had shifted, no longer amused, no longer charming. Just cold. You don't want to do this, Emily, he said. Put it down. Her grip tightened on the knife. You lied to me, she whispered. You're not who you say you are. Daniel exhaled, tilting his head. And what are you going to do about it? The question sent a chill down her spine. Then, without warning, Daniel lunged. Emily barely dodged in time, stumbling backward as Daniel grabbed for her wrist. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. His hands closed around her arms, yanking her forward. You should have stayed out of it, he hissed. Panic surged through her as she struggled against him, her mind racing for a way out. Then, just as suddenly as he had grabbed her, Daniel froze. His grip loosened. His eyes widened. A red dot hovered on his chest. Emily's breath caught. She turned her head, just in time to see figures moving outside the window. A voice boomed through the night. FBI. Drop the weapon. Daniel's entire body tensed. For the first time, Emily saw something she had never seen in him before. Fear. But instead of surrendering, he did the one thing she hadn't expected. He yanked her in front of him, like a human shield. The FBI agents outside shouted warnings, but Daniel's voice was the only one she heard. We're not done, Emily, he whispered in her ear. And before she could react, he dragged her backward, toward the back door. The agents stormed in. Chaos erupted. And in the midst of it all, Daniel and Emily disappeared into the night. Emily's pulse pounded as Daniel yanked her through the back door, his grip vice-like around her wrist. The FBI agents stormed into the house behind them, their voices sharp with urgency. Stop! Hands in the air! But Daniel didn't stop. He pulled Emily into the darkened backyard, weaving between the trees like he had planned this escape 100 times before. Her heart pounded as she stumbled, her mind racing for a way out. Daniel, Please, she gasped. You can't run forever. He didn't answer. His grip tightened, dragging her toward a black SUV parked just beyond the fence. A getaway car. Emily's stomach twisted. If he got her into that vehicle, she might never be seen again. She had seconds to act. Emily suddenly twisted, jerking her body to the side with all her strength. Daniel hadn't expected it. His grip faltered just enough for her to break free. She ran. Bare feet pounding against the cold ground, she sprinted toward the flashing red and blue lights in the distance. Help, she screamed. A gunshot rang out. Emily ducked instinctively, her ears ringing. The bullet missed, but the message was clear. She wasn't just an escapee. She was at a loose end. The FBI agents heard the shot. Freeze, one of them roared, their silhouettes emerging through the trees, weapons drawn. Daniel spun, realizing he was trapped. His breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes darting between Emily and the advancing agents. Then, in a final act of desperation, he bolted for the SUV. Emily turned just in time to see him yank the door open, scrambling inside. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched against the pavement. An agent raised his weapon. Don't let him get away. A deafening crack split the night. The windshield of the SUV exploded in a spray of shattered glass. The car veered wildly, swerving off the road, then slammed into a tree with a sickening crunch. Smoke curled from the hood. Silence. Emily's legs felt weak as she stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. The agents rushed forward, weapons still raised. Daniel's limp form was slumped over the steering wheel. Blood streaked across his forehead. Emily felt her breath hitch. After everything, was it really over? A voice crackled over a radio. Suspect is down. Proceeding with caution. The lead agent turned to Emily. Are you hurt? She shook her head, still unable to process what had just happened. The agent hesitated before glancing toward the wrecked SUV. You have no idea who you married, do you? Emily swallowed hard. I know enough. But even as the words left her lips, she knew there was still so much she didn't understand. Hours later, sitting in an FBI interrogation room, Emily finally got the full story. Daniel Reynolds wasn't Daniel Reynolds at all. His real name was Mark Evans, a former financial analyst who had orchestrated one of the most elaborate Ponzi schemes in recent history. Millions of dollars had vanished under his watch, leaving countless victims in financial ruin. When the authorities closed in, he disappeared. New identity. New life. And Emily? She had been the perfect cover. A respected journalist, a woman with no criminal ties. The ultimate alibi. But she had never been part of his plan. She was just collateral damage. Emily stepped out of the FBI office just as the sun was rising. The weight of everything she had been through threatened to crush her, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. Daniel, Mark, whatever his name had been, was gone. And she? She was free. For the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. And as she walked away, leaving behind the nightmare she had barely escaped, she knew one thing for certain. She would never ignore her instincts again. Now I would like to know your thoughts on this story. Kindly share in the comments section. Also, kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so that you will get notified when we post more interesting and mysterious true crime story.